at Work, our weekly webinar series. I'm Dan Sweet. I'm Director of Public Relations and Communications for Helicopter Association International. Thank you for joining our webinar this week. My title slide's a little bit different than what our panelist has on her title slide today, but ultimately what it comes down to is our subject is going to be dealing with human factors. This is something we tried to do earlier in March, but ran into technical difficulties. So we're pleased that you were able to join us again today for this repeat and hopefully we'll get everything through this one today. Our panelist today is Kim Hutchings, who's President and CEO of Volo Mission. We'll get to a little bit more information about her in just a minute. Your questions are welcome. Our webinars are interactive. We appreciate your participation. Feel free to chat during the webinar, but if you want to ask a question that you want us to try and get an answer from Kim at the conclusion of her presentation today, please use the question module. It just makes it that much easier for us to be able to focus on one area rather than using both. Generally, the question module is either at the bottom of your screen or at the side of your screen, maybe a drop down if you're watching this on a phone or something like that. But please feel free to answer or ask any questions. These webinars are being recorded. We will try to get the webinar recording up tomorrow as early as possible so that you can share it. It may be Monday, actually Tuesday, because we have a 3-day holiday weekend this weekend in the US. Feel free to share it with anybody you think would be interested. Pass the link around, watch it again at your convenience. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about our panelists today. Kim Hutchings is an entrepreneur, a mentor, a certified personal trainer, and a helicopter pilot who is passionate about the increasing awareness of the importance of human performance in the helicopter industry. Kim has a BA in psychology from the University of Southern California, a master's in aeronautical science with specializations in human factors and safety systems from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and a master's in leadership and organizational development from the University of Texas, Dallas. Kim loves to fly, is driven by her love of flying and passion for helping others. With her psychology, leadership, and coaching, personal training background, and safety specialties, she brings a crucial additional element to Volo Mission, which is a company that she runs with Andre Hutchings, her husband, in Texas, training people to conduct long line operations. She writes for Vertical Magazine. She has served on working groups for HAI, and apparently they have a new family of alpacas there at their ranch. Kim, can you join me now, please?
Yes, hi Dan, thanks.
Sounds like you are quite the Renaissance person. We are greatly appreciative that you were able to take time to join us again today. Look forward to hearing your presentation. Please go ahead.
Great, thanks. All right, so second time's a charm, right? Get this going here. Okay, now here we go. Can everyone see this?
It hasn't come up yet on my screen, Kim.
Okay, it's let me try again here. Oh, not wanting to come up.
Funny how it worked right before the webinar started during that testing, but technology is our friend, right?
Yes, exactly. Try this again. There we go.
I do see it now, Kim.
Okay, perfect.
I'll let you go.
Okay, thanks. All right. So today we're here to talk about what I call the missing piece of the safety puzzle. That's emotional intelligence, and we'll get into that here a little bit more. So with this presentation, it's about 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And so when we think about this ice cream cone here, we're gonna think about this presentation. There's going to be a lot of different information like this ice cream here, but we're only going to get about this much because each topic can go in great detail, and so we're just going to give a highlight of, you're just going to get a teeny tiny sample of everything, just due to time. So accidents are devastating. They're emotionally, financially, and socially, devastating to companies, to people, to our industry. And that's why we're always working to solve this problem, trying to decrease our number of accidents. So thinking about how do we prevent accidents? It starts with what we think of as human factors. And I say human factors, I think we tend to just generalize human factors. And when it comes to anything to do with humans, pilot error, something to do that's actually non-mechanical related, we tend to just throw it under human factors. Let's look at what human factors is. So it's concerned with the application of what we know about people, their abilities and characteristics, and the limitations to the design of equipment they use, environments in which they function, and the jobs they perform. But human factors is actually a form of measurement. So it measures, it's looking at flight navigation design, our situational awareness, our tracking errors, how we react, the time that it takes for us to react. We use simulators. It involves pilot, air traffic controllers, non-aviation personnel. We look at experiments, questionnaires, observations, incident reports, and then factor analysis and correlation. So we're looking at all these things and we're taking measurements on them. Within aviation, human factors has been focused predominantly on error reduction, either through engineering and safety and efficiencies or through training and monitoring. So using checklists. So again, working to reduce that error. But human factors didn't necessarily solve our problem. We're still having that issue as far as accidents. So then we moved into crew resource management. That was our next step. We knew that we were still having trouble with what was going on in the cockpit and people's relationships. So then, like I said, we're moving into crew resource management, working together and trying to make that fit. So crew resource management, again, it's a safety and production tool. It's a proactive approach rather than reactive measures like it is in human factors. It's a solid introduction to working with people and the differences that they have. And we started looking at that, the way that we communicate, and seeing how people get along and work together. It initially started in the cockpit and then we started working our way out. There was a set of CRM skills, a list here that was created based on what they found is communication, situational awareness, our decision-making, how adaptable or flexible we are, our assertiveness, and our leadership. Assertiveness is another big one as far as speaking up in the cockpit. So once again, CRM did not solve our problem. It improved it significantly. We hear a lot about how positive CRM is, which it is. All these things are positive. But it was not solving the problem. So then we started looking at the organization. And that's when we started moving into safety management systems. So SMS there are programs used to improve safety, and it's another proactive approach. We look at past things that have happened in the past to try and create solutions to prevent them in the future. We create a framework for our organizations so that we can work within that framework, depending, each organization is supposed to have their own SMS that's unique to them. Then we include these tools, ways to mitigate risk and identify hazards. But again, so SMS is a formal top-down organizational wide approach to managing safety risk and assuring the effectiveness of safety risk controls. So it's looking again at the whole system. So right now in safety, looking at what we do have, we have the human factors, and we're looking at that interaction between machine and humans. We have our CRM, so we're looking at interactions between people, and we're looking at SMS, so the interaction of the whole entire system or our organization. And then just to give a interesting story, I was sat in at a safety conference, and there was some human factors specialists, and they gave a presentation on a pilot who was taking some people off the side of a mountain, and he had made repeated trips up there with success, and was on his last trip up and back down to bring some more people off the mountain. And he ended up clipping the rock with his rotor blade. And so these human factor specialists, I thought it was amazing. It was extremely impressive. Went in and they literally broke it down frame per frame where his line of sight was and how he missed seeing that rock ledge again. But part of that too is, the other thing that had been going on is that he was increasing his speed and his turnaround time. And so he was getting more confident and going faster to get up and down that hill. And that's where we start looking at what are we missing. And so that's emotional intelligence, and that's interaction with self. So again, we have the machine, the crew, the system, and now we need to look at ourself. So if we were going to think of a human, so we have human factors would be the brain, and emotional intelligence you would think of as the heart. So again, talking about how we interact with our systems, it's very logical. We're looking for line of sight, and when we're creating human factors, we're looking at where that lever should be placed in the cockpit, natural reach, that sort of stuff is, design. That's the main focus of human factors. And so when we look at emotional intelligence, we're looking at actually the human, the personal side of things. So what is emotional intelligence? It's a set of emotional and social skills that influence the way we perceive and express ourselves, the way we develop and maintain our social relationships. That's not only at work, but with others around us, our family, our friends, just how we just interact with people, how we cope with challenges, our stress tolerance, whether we speak up, whether we don't. We use emotional, and then when we use emotional information in an effective and meaningful way. And when we're saying effective and meaningful way, it's being able to identify those emotions that we're feeling and being able to express that in a way that's not offensive or, hurt someone's feelings or, angers them. And when I say informational or emotional information too, I'm not referring to, this isn't being an emotional person. This is just, we're humans. We have a wide variety of emotions. And a lot of us aren't aware of that variety. And we'll discuss that a little bit in a minute. So what EI is not, it's not your aptitude, has nothing to do with what you've achieved in your life or not achieved. It's not your vocational interest. It's not your personality. This question comes up a lot, is it your personality? No, it's not. Our personality is pretty set through our life. I mean, some things can change, but it's kind of like we are who we are. If you're more of an introverted person, I mean, that's your personality. You're not all of a sudden going to turn into an extroverted person kind of thing. We kind of settle into who we are, what we like, that kind of thing. Emotional intelligence is not set. It's a skill. So we can always work to improve that skill. And it's not our intelligence level, not our IQ. You can have an extremely smart person with a high IQ that can really lack emotional intelligence. And you can see that a lot in some of the very public leaders, business leaders, world leaders, whatever. They can be extremely intelligent, but not very emotionally intelligent. So the difference between expertise, IQ, and EQ. IQ is, if you know how to do something, EQ is to know you. So expertise, I think we're all pretty familiar with what an expert is. They know their subject matter. They've got a lot of experience in it. They've been doing, studying, performing, whatever that is for quite a long time. Again, IQ, I think everyone's pretty familiar with IQ. It's just a score for several standardized tests, and that's given you an IQ. So when we say EQ, that's similar to IQ, to where you take an assessment. For example, you could take an assessment and you've got different levels of emotional intelligence skills, and you take all those together and it gives you one number, which is your emotional quotient. And that overall number is the level of your ability to understand others, what motivates them, and how to work with them cooperatively. So there are lots of EQ models out there. There's lots and lots of information out there. There's lots and lots of books out there. And I did a lot of reading on emotional intelligence and looked at some of the more popular people like Daniel Goleman. He's one of the most popular emotional intelligence experts. He's written many, many books on it. And so I read lots of his books. And then I also read this other book by Stephen Sine, who has this particular model. Now, the reason why I stick with this model and present off of it is because I feel that it is the most similar, or can be translated, I guess, to those working in aviation, other high-risk industries or demanding industries, because it's kind of how we operate in our environment. These are critical skills that we need to do or to perform well in our environment and to remain safe in our environment. I guess emotional intelligence is a lot of the popularity is around leadership. And so that's why, again, I think that this model, even though it is about leadership as well, it really translates well to our aviation and other high-risk industries. So we'll get into it a bit here. Again, you have your overall quotient, and then you have 5 composite scales, and then you have your subscales, and each one builds on the other. So your total EQ is your success in coping with environmental demands. It's your snapshot of your overall well-being. And like I said, it's made up of 5 composite scales and 15 subscales. So you're just gonna have to bear with me for a few minutes here. I'm just going to read off quickly, just so that you have an idea and start thinking about where this fits in and why it's important to our industry here, or aviation. So we start with self-regard. It's in the self-perception composite. Self-regard is respecting oneself while understanding and accepting one's strengths and weaknesses. Self-regard is often associated with feelings of inner strength and self-confidence. Self-actualization is the willingness to persistently try to improve oneself and engage in the pursuit of personally relevant and meaningful objectives that lead to rich and enjoyable life. That's either continuing your education, starting a new skill, learning how to golf, whatever that situation is. You're just continuing to pursue things that are enjoyable. Emotional self-awareness includes recognizing and understanding one's own emotions. This includes the ability to differentiate between subtleties in one's own emotions while understanding the cause of these emotions and the impact they have on one's own thoughts and actions and those of others. Tongue twister there. Again, this is important. This is not saying that you're an emotional person. It's not saying that you go around, sad or, displaying, being what we might think of as melodramatic. It's just recognizing what's going on and then being able to pretty much say what's going on. So moving on to self-expression, we have emotional expression. Is openly expressing one's feelings verbally and non-verbally. We tend to give off a lot of non-verbal cues that we may not be aware of. Assertiveness includes communicating beliefs, feelings, and thoughts openly and defending personal rights, values in a socially acceptable, non-offensive, and non-destructive manner. Big one there, important. Non-offensive and non-destructive. Independence is the ability to be self-directed and free from emotional dependency on others. Decision-making, planning, and daily tasks are completed autonomously. So being able to, again, work on your own, but also not being too independent, which we can talk about that in a little bit. Interpersonal relationships refer to the skills of developing and maintaining mutually satisfying relationships that are characterized by trust and compassion. Empathy is recognizing, understanding, and appreciating how other people feel. Empathy involves being able to articulate your understanding of another's perspective and behaving in a way that respects others' feelings. Social responsibility is willingly contributing to society, to one's social group. So again, this could mean your work group, and generally in the welfare of others. Again, when we say this can still relate to your work group and those, that you work closely with, or your team, or whatever. Social responsibility involves acting responsibly, having social consciousness, and showing concern for the greater community. Decision-making, problem solving is the ability to find solutions to problems and situations where emotions are involved. Problem solving includes the ability to understand how emotions impact decision making. So that's a big one. Reality testing is the capacity to remain objective to seeing things as they really are. This capacity involves recognizing when emotions or personal biases can cause one to be less objective. I see this quite often, especially training people. Then impulse control is the ability to resist or delay an impulse, drive, or temptation to act, and involves avoiding rash behaviors and decision making. Lastly, we have stress management, flexibility in adapting emotions, thoughts, and behaviors to unfamiliar, unpredictable, and dynamic circumstances or ideas. Stress tolerance involves coping with stressful or difficult situations and believing that one can manage or influence situations in a positive manner. Optimism is an indicator of one's positive attitude and outlook on life. It involves remaining hopeful and resilient despite occasional setbacks. Okay, got through that part. All right, so now looking at emotional intelligence and how we can use it to build a strong safety culture. We're going to kind of look at the different examples, and we tend to talk about leadership and safety culture, and everything starts from the top. So, and that's also is emotional intelligence. It needs to start from the top and work its way all the way through the organization and all the way back up. No one should be without emotional intelligence. This is a skill that we should have just in general. Again, because it pertains to so much in our life, our families, like I said, our kids, our relationships, whatever. This is a skill that can be developed for so many things, for it to benefit. So again, since we are looking at our leaders first, what makes a great leader? We think about, when I tend to ask this question when I'm in a group of people, and since you guys can't respond, we don't necessarily look at what makes a great leader is their technical skill. We don't say, he's a great pilot, that makes him a great leader. She's a top-notch mechanic, so she's a great leader. We tend to think of our great leaders to have skills that are supportive, inspiring, people feel listened to, they have my back, understood me, trusted me, they're consistent, clear in expectations, included me in decisions. So there's nothing on this list that pertains to a leader's actual technical skill, especially when, we think about our industry, and this is not exclusive to aviation, because I've had this discussion with countless people in many different industries, and it seems that there's a similarity there, that people are promoted either within because they have had a really great technical skill, or they've done really well at what that is, and then they're promoted into a upper management position, and now that technical skill is no longer there. Because, for example, you take a pilot or a crew chief or someone of that nature, and they're in an aircraft or working on an aircraft, and now you promote them to management, and now they're in an office. They're not doing their best technical skill anymore. Now their new skill is people. So that's where this becomes very, very important. As far as it starting from the top, and that leaders need this emotional intelligence because now they're in a management position. And if they don't have this skill, or they're not developing or balancing these skills, and then they're going out there to work with others and inspire them, or get them to do things that they need to do, it may not work for them. So again, just following up with that, keeping in mind that an expert does not equal a leader. So just because they have maybe a tremendous amount of experience and are fantastic at what they do, it does not automatically translate to them being a fantastic leader. So we're going to take a closer look at how EI works. Again, keeping with our little ice cream cone theme here. I'm only going to give a really condensed small snapshot of how we could, I mean, I could have a discussion about this all day long, so we're going to really limit it. And hopefully it doesn't go too quick or too short as far as the information, but let's start. So we looked at the leader just briefly again, and now we're going to look at a pilot just a little bit. So we have the FAA has what they refer to as 5 hazardous attitudes. And we're just using this as an example of how we can apply emotional intelligence to something like this. So they're saying the FAA has described hazardous attitudes that contribute to poor pilot judgment, but can be effectively counteracted by redirecting the hazardous attitude so that correct action can be taken. As someone that's worked in human behavior for over 20 years, that's you know, a very simplistic way of, there's a lot involved with humans, let's say. But as far as recognition of hazardous thoughts, so they're saying that the person needs to recognize they're having a hazardous thought, and then they should label what that hazardous thought is, and then have a corresponding antidote for that. And we'll go to the next slide here that will kind of give an example. So those 5 hazardous attitudes that have been identified is anti-authority. So you can't tell me what to do. I'm not, you know, whatever, just, I'm not going to follow the rules. I know how to do this. Let me do it. Impulsivity, doing it too quickly. And then you're supposed to, you know, the antidote there is think about not so fast. I need to think first. Invulnerability. So it's not going to happen to me. I don't need to worry about it, you know. And then that person needs to think, oh, yes, it could happen to me. Macho, I can do it. And then your antidote there would be stop taking chances, taking foolish chances. So, and then resignation, what's the use? And then the antidote there is I'm not helpless, I can make a difference. So now what we can do, emotional intelligence, there is an assessment that can be given. And this, your emotional intelligence is your skill, is a skill, our skills that you can develop. The emotional intelligence assessment is a tool that you can use to help gain awareness and work on those skills, identify what may need working, what needs to be balanced. So we have the, you know, your overall skills, and then we have the assessment. So let's say you had a pilot that had hazardous attitude, or anti-authority, I should say. Yeah, hazardous attitude, that's anti-authority. This attitude is found in people who do not like anyone telling them what to do. In a sense, they are saying, no one can tell me what to do. They may be resentful of having someone telling them what to do, or may regard rules, regulations, procedures as silly or unnecessary. So if we were to look at if that pilot was given an assessment and we, you know, looked at the results there, what we may find on that assessment is that their impulse control is low. Okay, so you had a scale there and it ranks, you know, you have the middle, I guess that's the average, and then you have, you know, a lower side and a higher side. So their impulse control would be on the lower side. which would be the behavior that they would display is explosive and unpredictable. They lack anger control. They get easily frustrated. They're aggressive and abusive. And this doesn't necessarily mean physically abusive. It could be verbally, but I've actually heard people afterwards tell me, yeah, so-and-so, this somebody I work with, he actually, has gotten physically abusive, like pushed people, or, there's been fights. I've heard about that. So it does happen. So again, going back to this, they're low on impulse control and they're high on independence. So they're self-directed, they're self-determined, they're extremely decisive, they're free from emotional dependence, and they're confident. And if they're really high there, that on that independence, usually they tend to be overly confident. So you can kind of see where that assessment can give us clues as to, okay, what kind of person may I be working with? Oh, looking at these results and that kind of thing, I might have something on my hands here. So I can either, work with this person and find out what's going on, or, choose to have more oversight, or whatever that situation may be. But again, the assessment is a tool for us to see that kind of stuff. Mechanics. So again, the FIA has identified the dirty dozen, and then translating that into emotional intelligence. So for the dirty dozen, we have lack of communication, complacency, lack of knowledge, distraction, lack of teamwork, fatigue, lack of resources, pressure, lack of assertiveness, stress, lack of awareness, and then and norms. So if we were, again, to look at this emotional intelligence composite scale here, I mean, we have lack of communication. That's in our self-perception and our self-expression. Lack of knowledge might be that self-actualization. So they're not going on to learn something new, expand their knowledge on their skill. Distraction, lack of teamwork, that would fall into that interpersonal composite. So those interpersonal relationships, empathy, that social responsibility that I referred to earlier, where they feel responsible to their team, to their company, to the mission, to whatever that is. So, if that social responsibility is on the lower side, that might mean that they're not necessarily a great team player. And same thing with those interpersonal relationships. Maybe they have a hard time, building friendships. So again, that might translate to not working well on a team. We have, again, fatigue might fall into that social or that stress management. Same thing with that pressure. That will fall into that, could fall into that decision making and stress management. So we don't handle pressure very well, and it stresses us out, and we can't really, deal with that, or we're not very optimistic, and so that pressure might be too much. Lack of assertiveness, we actually have that there on our emotional expression composite right there. It says assertiveness, again, stress and that stress management. Lack of awareness, this could be our self perception, our emotional self-awareness there. And then the norms would probably fall into that interpersonal, what's going on, what are the norms in our organization, what are the norms on my team, what are the norms in this industry, looking at those kind of things. Okay, so those were just kind of sample examples that I was using to try and relate some of that to emotional intelligence and how it can translate based on what's already presented out there. Being able to do this a second time around, I was able to go back and actually gather my own real data. I have taken 50 assessments that I've given to 50 aviation professionals. This includes pilots, maintenance personnel, and almost half of those that I gave the assessment to fell under that leadership realm, that were also pilots or mechanics. And so I've taken that data and I'm going to present that here. So I took the lowest. Okay, so I took their entire assessment that broke down every single one of those subcategories, and I wanted to see what was scoring the lowest in each composite. So you look at the self-perception composite, and it's made up of these 3 subscales. The emotional self-awareness was the lowest. So again, I'm just going to read this quickly. So emotional self-awareness, and that's over 50%. And don't forget that this includes leadership, management, includes recognizing and understanding one's own emotions. This includes the ability to differentiate between subtleties in one's own emotions while understanding the cause of these emotions and the impact they have on one's own thoughts and actions and those of others. Okay, so important there about what's going on, and especially if you think about management, they're not aware of it and how it's affecting other people. The self-expression. So 62%. For 62% of the people, emotional expression was the lowest out of the self-expression composite. So emotional expression is openly expressing one's feelings verbally and non-verbally, which makes perfect sense, because if people aren't, on the previous slide, they're not aware of their emotional self-awareness. So how can they express it? So that interpersonal composite, empathy. So more than 50% of people, their lowest was empathy. And this is interesting to me because not only was it the lowest in that composite, but empathy was identified on their whole entire assessment as one of the lowest scores, period. So there is a lot of lack of empathy in this industry, which I look at that and it doesn't necessarily surprise me. I see a lot of there's a lot of differences there, and and this is just, again, to keep it very, very basic and not going into any detail, but I've personally heard, the differences between mechanics not liking pilots, pilots not liking mechanics, or not understanding. That's what I want to say. They don't understand each other's roles or how to support each other in their roles. I see that a lot. And that's only one small example. But, I've also seen lack of empathy in pilots and co-pilots. Co-pilots are treated a certain way. Again, I see a lot of this. So definitely something we want to keep in mind. Decision-making, this was interesting also. So it was pretty neck and neck, with their lowest scores being impulse control and reality testing. So impulse control is the ability to resist or delay an impulse, drive, or temptation to act, and involves avoiding rash behaviors and decision making. And reality testing is the capacity to remain objective by seeing things as they really are. The capacity involves recognizing when emotions or personal biases can cause one to be less objective. I think that there's a lot of things probably that accidents or incidents that you could Google and find a lot of lack of impulse control and lack of reality testing. So making decisions that probably shouldn't have been made, and it's impulsive. It's impulsive, like, oh, hey, this looks, let me see if I can fly under this bridge. Oh, okay. The reality is that, what's the reality there? Should you really be doing that? Like, do you have the skill to do that? All kinds of stuff. There's plenty of things that you can find on the internet that would show a lack of impulse control and reality testing. And then problem solving too. That's not, much further behind. To me, we talk so much about decision making in aviation. Well, this is a massive reality check for us. Impulse control and reality testing, not that great. Stress management. This industry is great with dealing with stress. What's not great is over 50% of the people, their optimism was low. It was the lowest in that composite. But again, I was seeing, based on the numbers, that the optimism was one of the lower numbers in the whole entire assessment. But that's something to talk about on another day for sure. What's going on there with the industry, and not being very optimistic. And again, optimism is an indicator of one's positive attitude and outlook on life. It involves remaining hopeful and resilient despite occasional setbacks. So just thinking about that there. So I said we've come back to our CRM skills and looking at emotional intelligence skills. So what we do is when we talk about, we have our CRM skills, and then now we think about, okay, why isn't CRM solving all our problems? What's going on? What can we do to, make this situation better? If we were to look at what's been identified as our CRM skills, and then look at the data that I just presented, looking, at true real data as far as the EI skills. So we look at CRM on our communication. Well, emotional expression, 62% of the people, the emotional expression was low. It was one of their lowest, in that composite. And again, significantly lower. Decision making, we look at the reality testing and impulse control of people. That was lower also, that situation there. Our adaptability and flexibility, that's pretty good. It's a flexible, I think everyone, most people in this industry need to be flexible for all kinds of situations. We're dealing with machines, with weather, with people. So, that's constant. There's so many things that we can't control. So I think most people are pretty flexible in this industry. Assertiveness. This is interesting because there wasn't an issue with assertiveness in this as being low. So only 12% of the people scored a little bit lower on the assertiveness. But the other thing, which I didn't put the numbers in or look at because I was just looking at the low, is you can go the opposite direction of assertiveness being too high. So So it's not necessarily great that, high assertiveness is really high, because then that person will tend to override someone else, or other people, or other, things that need to get done based on what they want to do. So it has a lot to do with balance there. Leadership. Now I put leadership equaling empathy because when you look at leadership and all the different styles or the different models of leadership, empathy is identified as one of the top skills to have for a leader, or to have great leadership, because having great leadership doesn't necessarily mean that you are in a management or an executive role. There's always somebody that steps up in a group, no matter who it is, to become the leader. So this is important. If you've got a crew out somewhere working, off site, and you've got maintenance, ground personnel, pilots, and they're off, and there's not necessarily, a manager there managing them. Somebody's going to step forward and be that leader. But we're showing a massive lack of empathy in this industry, which means, that doesn't translate as very positive for your leadership skills, your overall leadership skills. So again, you might be very good at your technical skill, but then you're trying to get everyone to work together, or your group or your team or whatever's going on. And if you've stepped up as that leadership person into that role, and there's not a lot of empathy there, then that doesn't necessarily translate to being a good leader. You've just stepped forward. So just something to think about. So just our little image there, we have our little EI guy in red and our CRM in yellow, and then the data comes through and kind of like knocks it down a bit. Like we need to work on this, and how we work on our CRM skills is working on our EI skills, and then that will translate over. So they go hand in hand. Just looking quickly at what organizations are not experiencing, or when their EI is not present. Columbia's shuttle crew is an example. Space Shuttle Columbia was destroyed in a disaster that claimed the lives of 7 of its crew. Cultural traits and organizational, this was an investigation that came in and did it. So cultural traits and organizational practices detrimental to safety were developed, including resilience or past success as a substitute engineering practice. Organizational barriers that prevented the effective communication, lack of integrated management across program elements, and the evolution of information chain, and command decision-making processes that operated outside of organizational rules. Columbia findings, managers at many levels in NASA, from GS-14 to associate administrator, have taken their positions without following a recommended standard of training and education to prepare them for the roles of increased responsibility. NASA does not have a standard agency-wide career planning process to prepare its junior and mid-level managers for advanced roles. Again, just referring back to, a lot of times we're promoted from within and based on our skill, but not given that leadership training or experience or coaching or whatever. So findings, lack of effective communication, unqualified manager, signals were overlooked, people were silenced, and that's going on there. So how effective are your managers and leaders? Do leaders take the time to stop, listen, and really speak with their teams and crews? Are they viewed as uncaring, hard, rigid, and bullies? I've heard this as well. Do they hold themselves as others accountable and have the conversations that are required, or are they looked at by their people as having a lack of backbone? and this is important too, is your overall pool of employees fully engaged, working together and putting in the extra effort, or are they putting in just enough? Why it's important to your operation: increased leadership ability, increased team performance, improving your decision making, decreasing occupational stress. So real quick, no, we're coming to an end here. After supervisors in a manufacturing plant recognized or had training in emotional competencies, lost time was reduced by 50%. Formal grievances were reduced from 15 per year to 3 per year, and the plant exceeded productivity goals by 250,000. In 1 year, the U.S. Air Force invested less than 10,000 for emotional competence testing, which is again the emotional intelligence assessment, and they saved nearly $3 million in recruitment. So you can use this as a tool for your company. A lot of organizations do. Big corporate does. The Air Force does, uses this assessment, to give to people. Some companies do personality assessments or, that sort of stuff to see. You can use this as well. After Motorola's manufacturing facility had training in stress management and emotional intelligence, 93% of employees had an increase in productivity. Your EQ is estimated for about 27 or 45% of your job success. And if you're tuned out of your own emotions, will you be poor at reading them in other people? Okay, I think that just about, yes, we're done. So I'm prepared for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Kim. That was a great presentation. I have not been able to sit in on your classes at Heli Expo in the past. I did forget to mention that as one of your qualifications or part of your resume when I introduced you. You have been a very popular presenter during many HAI Heli Expos. We do have some questions. Let's start with one from, let's see. When looking at and assessing the pilots, was there consideration on whether those pilots flew as single pilots, single pilot / crewed aircraft, or multi-pilot flight decks? Seems like the EQ could be quite different among those different populations.
So we've had, I'm just trying to think that, so it doesn't really translate as far as your EQ and that assessment. It's based on you as an individual. So it's not like if you were to go have CRM training, then you're talking about working with multi-crew or other crew, that kind of thing, dual cockpit or single cockpit. But emotional intelligence is just about you. So it doesn't matter who's involved. This is just an assessment of you as an individual and how well that can, and then you can take that assessment and look at it and see, oh wow, okay, I'm a great communicator. I have great interpersonal skills. If you have great interpersonal skills, then most likely you're going to work well in a multi-cockpit environment or dual, that kind of stuff. If you get your assessment and that interpersonal skill is on the lower side, you might need to develop that more. I'm not sure if that answered the question or not, but it's has to do with you and not so much your environment, the cockpit, or who you're working with.
Okay, well, we'll see if they come back with a follow-up question in case it wasn't quite what they're looking for. But that does bring up something I was wondering. Can schools or employers use EQ or EI tests to help determine whether a person will be successful as a pilot or mechanic, or whether they should be in a specific mission segment, a utility pilot versus a tour operator versus an air medical pilot? Or are these tools more for assessing somebody, say, for a leadership role?
No, great question. It's what you could use it for. So it would benefit to know where they would fall on that, on their assessment, on the skills that they currently have. Because remember, we want to think of this as a skill. And depending, let's say, okay, I know this person is going to be now going into a crew chief position. So as a crew chief position, they've got to lead a team of people. So let me look at their assessment. Okay, well, this, and this, I see that we need to, balance that out a bit or beef it up to make them the most effective crew chief possible. So we don't necessarily want to say, okay, well, your assessment is this, so that will mean that you can or cannot do this role. It just means, okay, we have this is what we're starting with. Now let's work this out. And the greatest thing about emotional intelligence is that you can always improve those skills, balance those skills. And I also didn't mention it at the beginning when I was talking about personality is stable. Emotional intelligence is dynamic. So let's say, for example, you take your emotional intelligence assessment right today. You've got the results, you're completely happy with them. You're like, okay, I'm doing pretty well. This is looking pretty good. I'm pretty balanced, whatever. And then, 8 months down the road, or 12 months down the road, I should say, you take it again and, you've lost your job, or something's going on, or you have a boss or that you don't like, or you work for a company you don't like. That assessment you take can change based on your environment, your situation, how you're feeling at the time, that kind of stuff. So it's dynamic, it changes, but it's also something that we can change for ourselves, the way, okay, I need to work on this empathy thing, because in order for me to build these interpersonal relationships, in order for me to be a great leader, I see that I'm, it's a little bit low, and then you work on that. So you can use it to, knowledge is power.
Okay, well, that actually leads into another question I had. Knowledge is power, and apparently a person can work on their own individual skills. You had mentioned for the maintenance side, the dirty dozen is identified by the FAA. Knowing that these are so common that, the FAA literally calls them the dirty dozen. Mm-hmm. Is there no way to train the industry away from them? It sounds like a person can do it, but they would have to be willing to work on it, I guess.
Yes, and that's exactly, Dan, why I do the presentations and the webinars and the classes with the HAI, because as an industry, we, just like we had HumanFactors, we have our CRM, we've moved into SMS, we need to move into emotional intelligence to continue to improve our industry and, move towards that, decreasing that dirty dozen, working on our accident rates, working on our leadership, all that kind of stuff, working on our decision making. This could be, you can learn this as early as in your school, flight school, your maintenance training, the schools, it should start there. Then it should go into the organizations that you work for. And then it should go to our regulators, the importance of this. So it definitely, just like we talk about a company working at CEO to the top down and bottom up, it's the same thing. The emotional intelligence should be fluid back and forth all the way through every part of our industry.
Do you think emotional intelligence is misunderstood still? And what do we need to do to try to help make it more commonly accepted in the industry?
It's extremely misunderstood. And I remember when I first started putting these presentations together, a mentor of mine who's not necessarily, she's not in aviation, but I was telling her I wanted to do that. She comes from a corporate background, so she's aware of emotional intelligence. And I said, well, I'd like to start using emotional intelligence. And she said, are you sure you should use those words? You're, in a male dominated industry. Would that, really discourage people from coming? And, I thought about it and I'm like, no, because emotional intelligence is what it is. There is no other, sugarcoating or trying to change what it is. It is what it is. And like you mentioned that it's a popular presentation. And to be quite honest, sometimes I'm surprised at how many people come in the room because I still use the words emotional intelligence. I refuse not to, because it's important. And it makes me happy to see it. So I'm excited when people come in because they're willing to learn what it is. But when they get there and I ask the room full of people, does anyone know what emotional intelligence is? And nobody raises their hand and kind of like looks around. And the first thing I say is it's not about being emotional. It has nothing to do about being an emotional person. And so then it just kind of like, okay, then tell me what it really is about, So yeah, I'm trying to get it out there.
Okay, we have a question from Andrew. Do you think that the industry is ready to look at our EQ and how it applies to punitive and just cultures in our organizations?
And what regard, as far as?
Not sure. We'll see if he can expand upon that for us, maybe here real quick. In the meantime, let's see. Wayne was asking, do you have tools available that we can use individually to access our EQ, or can you tell us where they could find a method of self-assessment?
Yeah, there are some self-assessments that you could, I think, just Google online. It probably gives you a fair idea, but the assessments that are given to the people that I've worked with it's an actual company that has validated these assessments. It's a paid assessment. It's not free. It's all done on validity and calculated and that sort of thing. So yeah, you could find something, probably just a basic resource online, just Googling emotional intelligence assessment. It might be a good place to start to kind of create some awareness. I would probably go something, if you're really interested in it and pursuing it and, doing that, I'd probably do something more formal, like the EQI 2.0, so that you actually get, and it's a full 20-page report. It gives you a breakdown on everything and how it relates to you and what it translates to. So.
Okay. Let's see, it doesn't look like Andrew has come back with any responses. So I think that we're kind of trying to get to the point where we're going to wrap up here. Just in case he does come back, we'll ask you the one final question we normally ask at the end of any of our webinars. If there's one thing that you wanted our audience to take away today, what would that be, Kim?
Honestly, I would say how important emotional intelligence is to us and our safety culture, and how we, not just our safety culture, but how we all work together, and could really improve things for the industry and other people. So.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like we got anything back from Andrew, so please allow me to thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for the courses you offer during Heli Expo, the ways that you help the industry through working groups and presentations, webinars, things like this. Obviously, the work you're doing has great value, and so we simply appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you. I really like working with HAI, so thank you guys.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead. Kim, thank you again. I'll go ahead and get things wrapped up here real quick. Get my screen shared here as soon as I can get back to the right screen. There we go. Sorry about that. We don't have particular dates for webinars coming up. We're still trying to wrap things up. It looks like our schedule will be shifting a little bit here in the future. But I do know that we have some interesting topics that are coming up. We are going to get an update on aviation insurance. The Aviation Insurance Association has been working with me to try to come up with a series of topics that they feel like will be relevant to the industry. It's certainly a topic that has routinely come up in the questionnaire that we ask about suggested topics. People are always wanting to ask about insurance, and my guess is they're always trying to look to lower their rates. I know that HAI is looking at expanding some insurance options that we may be able to offer to our members. And so please keep an eye on that as well. The helicopter history may not be the exact right term, but I'm still trying to work on that. We have an expert from the Smithsonian Institution, the Aeronautical Museum, who's going to be coming in to talk to us about rotorcraft. And workforce development will be an issue. Trying to work with a couple of different groups to help coordinate the continuing shortage of pilots and mechanics. I mean, as much as the EQ, EI assessments that we talked about today, we may not have time to provide assessments. We need to bring a lot of people in the door fairly fast. And so we'll be talking about how we can work on that. I did mention the questionnaire just a second ago. We'll be sending you a questionnaire very shortly. We would appreciate it if you could take just a few minutes to respond. We'd love to hear what you would like for future webinars, what you thought about today's, what we could do right, what we could do better. We're always asking about that in general for HAI as well. HAI is a membership-based organization. We are very sensitive to the fact that we need to serve the members as best we can. If you have suggestions or areas of concern or things that you would like to see us try to do, please let us know. The best way to do that is through an email to Jim Viola, our president and CEO. His email address, president@rotor.org. It's very simple. He does see every email that comes in, and he does assign those emails to us for tasking. Before we wrap up entirely, please keep in mind that this coming weekend is Memorial Day weekend or Remembrance Day weekend. It's a time to honor those who gave their lives and sacrificed to their countries around the world in military service. And it's something that HAI takes very seriously, and we deeply appreciate the service of any military person, plus those who made the ultimate sacrifice. That does conclude our webinar for today. We are grateful that you took time to watch, and until next week or until we get a webinar scheduled, we ask that you be safe and that you fly safe.